Deireadh táime a snú na licht, and finally I'm going to talk to you and sort out in my mind how I'm going to approach this whole question of passing on information and knowledge. I'm 66 now, so I have no time to be writing books, and I have no wish to be pursuing things to make me well known or anything like that, or no ambitions in that way anymore, because I have too little time to do all the things I want to do: writing music, making tunes, doing various things in various fields that I'm interested in, social engineering if you like, spiritual matters. One of the projects that I'm involved in, for example, is to set all the 150 Psalms in the Bible to music, and I'm only halfway there, about 70 odd done. So time flies, and I'm going to try and impart what I've learnt over my 50 years on duty, because I started on duty in August of 1971, shortly before my father died. And in that long space of time, I've learnt a lot of things, experienced a lot of things, and been very lucky to have met a lot of my father's friends, and they became my friends after he died. And he had collected an eclectic company of creative people, but also political people, interesting people, people of an old world that was fast disappearing at the time. And I had the privilege of learning so much from them. So the whole question of learning and acquiring knowledge is in itself a special interest. I started to read when I was very young, and I've read voraciously ever since. And I only recently found out that I think I'm probably dyslexic, big time, because I still have my copybooks from my early days, and they're full of red ink all over the place, right from first infant school, as it were, right up through secondary school to university. Even Professor Fleischmann could not resist drawing huge red lines around all the bad spelling. And when I came along 40 years later to computers, and the spell check made an appearance, it was a wonderful, wonderful gift for the likes of me. And the same is true of the Irish language, which is my first language. So I always followed what I thought was the reality or truth of a thing. And that is not always clear from books and accounts. I'll give you an example. I was at an event where a monument was unveiled to commemorate an ambush that took place in these mountains in 1918. And this event happened in the actual unveiling happened in 72 or 73, after my father was dead. And I've read lots of accounts about Jack Lynch was there on the day and things that happened, and people get the date wrong, because originally the plaque was to be unveiled on the anniversary of the actual ambush, 50 years afterwards. And the problem is that because of politics at the time, it didn't happen. The stone has the date of the unveiling on it. The actual unveiling, at which I was present, didn't happen till 3 or 4 years later. Yet, in the historical accounts, they tend to look at the stone and they get the date wrong. And in this day and age of copy and paste, so many people doing theses and writing books and everything like that don't get the information correctly. They pick it up from a false account and repeat the false account. Now, that brings me to the subject, the very first thing I want to talk about, which is the importance of culture and what it means. What it means is a reflection of a civilization. And each civilization evolves differently, according to the area it was squeezed out of. So it evolves a different set of skills, and because of these skills, a different structure in that society or civilization. For example, Western civilization is based on the Roman model, which was top-down, was enforced, if you like, by use of army and strength and brute force and conquering and so on, and to keep all in place, rules and regulations. So you had this idea of the emperor or consul or whatever at the top, colour purple associated with it, and the different levels of authority all the way down, and they started using measurement as a primary structural organisational thing. So they had distances in chains or whatever, in feet. They had money, and everything got a value, a number. Numbers are very important. Their army was structured very rigidly with numbers and units like that. And they started building roads primarily to move their armies around because their priority was to keep control. And all their society evolved, and civilization evolved around this idea of control. So top down, center out, numbers important, rules and regulations, and the final sanction being physical force, incarceration, or even taking your very life away. So that was that structure, and that is still the structure in Western civilization. There's always control. So for example, in music, we see that with the conductor in front of a group of musicians controlling. Or we see if the conductor isn't there, we see it's usually the rhythm section that controls the flow of the music in that performance and so on. They lay down the very rhythm that is used. And you see that in the way it's written with the time signature, 3, 4, 6, 8, 4, 4, whatever. You see that denotes how you're going to space the music from start to finish. And then you have it written down in you have music itself tempered with the last 1,000 years. That is, each note has a piece shaved off it, so they'll all be controlled and fitted within a certain range, making them do, re, mi, fa, sol, la, ti, do, or the notes that will fit on instruments and that they'll be able to play at the same time together. All kinds of elements in our society reflects this basic fundamental thing of rules and regulations. If you there's rules there. If you break the rules, you'll be taken to court. There's a force called the police who will apprehend you and bring you to court. There's a judge, and there's even a place to put you aside as a punishment if you're not playing properly, playing music, playing civilization's rules. So in other civilizations, other things happen. In our culture, we were the opposite to that. We evolved in extended families in an area. So you stayed in that area, and what happened was, instead of you going to the center, your doctor came to your family, your poet came to your family, your judge to judge disputes came to your family. Everything came to your family, so you stayed in the one area, and you evolved in that area, perfecting whatever skills you needed to advance the goodness of that area. In good land, you might become famous as a tribe or family for raising racehorses, or for growing vegetables, or cattle was a big thing in this country. If you came from a mountainous area like this area here where there's poor land, you had to evolve other skills. This place was famous for poets, for example. So everything you produced the best you could in your area, and because you didn't travel outside of it, you evolved a dialect that was native to that area, whether in language or in music. So this is Muscree, singing was a big thing here. Over the mountain here, into Sliabh Luachra, music more so there. But they both have very distinct styles in music and in language also, whether in Irish or in English. And that was true of the whole island. It was a patchwork of all these different communities with a common understanding of responsibilities as we lived as a society. So we all had the same kind of basic things, like we need a doctor and the doctor would come to us, and we need a judge to come and judge disputes. And some family would specialize in medicine, another family would specialize in law and the Brehon laws and so on. And we evolved in that way. It was never possible to control us with the centralized authority. So we as a nation are scattered all over the world now with many different governments. In this island there are 2 governments in the island of Ireland, but equally so our society is pretty closely mirrored. We're still functioning in a way culturally in Scotland. And there are elements of our tribe all over the world. Our nation is scattered everywhere with different governments. But if we keep the same laws culturally, we still hold together as an identity. Now that is true of other civilizations too. They have other different systems. And one of the basic things in our culture is the root. So if you're telling a story, as in the story of the plaque being unveiled for the ambush, you'd say where you got the story from. I read this in the Cork Examiner, the Irish Times, or so-and-so told me, or I read it in a book by such and such a historian. You always give the source. And you then, by discussing it in the now, are pointing towards the future understanding of that story. Past to future. It's like a clothesline. One is anchored in the past, one end, and the other anchor is in the future by common understanding where the future is going. But if one end is loose, all your clothes fall to the ground and get dirtied. The whole thing becomes a mess. So when I write a piece of music, or compose, I don't like that word, when a piece of music comes through me, if somebody takes a piece of music that came from me and does not mention where it came from, then that piece of music loses its authenticity and its value and is lost quite often. The same way with a poem or a story, and that's what evolved copyright law. And copyright law evolved in this country with St. Columcille over a dispute about a copy that was made of a famous manuscript. And the monks that had made the copy were in dispute with the people that owned the original, another set of monks. And they went to Columcille, and he said his judgment was, Columcille lived in both worlds. He was he was an old druid, but he was at the same time he was a Christian priest or bishop and so on afterwards. And he made the decision, he said, to each cow its calf. In other words, the copy was a calf of the original book. So that's the fundamental basis of copyright law 1,000 years later. And in that way, it is very important that we give the continuity, that we explain where something came from. Ideas more than anything. For example, if you come into my house here, our house here, and you see a nice flower in the garden, and you pick it without saying anything and carry it home to you, the flower will fade in the morning after, or 2 days later. Whereas if you come up and say, I saw that lovely flower in the garden, you say to me, because of this kind of civilization and culture that we, the Gaelic nation, evolved in, I will feel obliged to give you a piece of that flower so that it will seed and grow for you. And then you can have many flowers, calves, versions of that flower in your own garden in continuity. But if you steal it, if you take it without adding the root to it, it will be gone. And that is the important thing about ideas. Ideas are just like pieces of music or anything else that is created. You should always give, for it to maintain its strength and virility, you should always give where it came from. I heard this first from such and such a place. I learnt this from such and such a one. I got this from such and such a place. Anyone listening to you can then decide for themselves if that source was dependable or deserving of further investigation. So this is the fundamental lesson that we're starting off with today, the importance of giving where the idea came from somewhere, the piece of music that it came from somewhere, all those kind of things, that you give the root. Because all I'm going to discuss over the next hundreds of talks will be in that frame, that stream of knowledge gathering. Because I learnt from other people. And I'll just acknowledge one today. When I was in the early 70s, shortly after my father died, two brothers arrived here, and they were going out with two sisters. Three of them were young teachers, and the fourth was a psychoanalyst. And they were the brothers Mick and Paul Hotels, and the sisters Malene and Gret. And they married. They introduced me to Jung, Carl Gustav Jung, and to that whole area. And I will talk about them some other time. But one of the important things that they did at that time was they opened my mind to other cultures as being distinct ways of living, and that I could not and should not try and take the best out of another culture and make it my own. I should learn from it and then see how that I could grow that out of my own culture. Not take it and impose it, but find it in my own culture, its vision of it. And for example, one of the first things I would like to say today is that I started studying the Quran, of course, and all these things, but the book of Tao, I have it here somewhere, yeah. Mick Hotels had this translated for me himself and hand wrote it all out. By his taking so much trouble with it, it forced me to study it properly. Mick died recently, and I'd like to acknowledge him from the beginning as one of those people that taught me so much. I mentioned seeds to you and flowers. I mentioned the sunflower seed. Well, if you came to me and asked for a plant, I would come and take one of these sunflower seeds and give it to you so that you could grow it in your garden of ideas. So in the next couple of months, I'm going to start a series of different streams of talks. One of them will be on composing music or making music or how music hangs together and understanding that, as much as I've learned. Another will be about the whole idea of spirituality, which we mentioned there, talking about the book of Tao and Mick Hotels. Another will be on further ideas that I've learned about culture itself and its role in life and its way in putting clothes on civilization. And there are various other streams too that I'd like to talk about of knowledge that I want to part with before I start getting doddery and forget it. So hopefully we'll see you in the weeks to come. Gurmagav.